So I'm going to talk about the 5 key components for social media success. I think this actually will build very nicely on how Werner opened up the day for you here. Little background on me, among other things, author of that book, 900 pages. It's a real page turner, I promise you. Who wants it? That hand right there. Okay. Let that be a lesson. Listen up. There you go.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. So I'm just going to dive right in and go through 5 different things as I promised. And the first I want to talk about is social media and SEO. I'm going to do a little myth busting here because there are a lot of people who believe that social media is the way to drive your entire SEO strategy. And it does play an important role, but I want to dig into what role it does play. First of all, if you were a geek in the SEO industry, like me, you might read studies from companies like Searchmetrics and Moz. Most of you probably don't know what those names are, but what they both did is studies where they tried to figure out how Google ranks things high in search results. And these studies were called correlation studies. So they would go study all the search results for hundreds of thousands of search results, and then see what things they had in common, and figure out whether or not that was a SEO ranking factor. And this particular study, in the top dozen or so things that they found correlated strongly with search ranking, are various types of social media signals. Don't worry about what they are, because I'm going to dive into this in a little more detail. So we have these studies, and they're telling us that all the things that rank really high in Google tend to have a lot of social shares associated with them. Well, shoot, let's just go do a whole bunch of social shares of our own content and get people to reshare it for us. We're going to rank high in Google. We'll be rich. Sounds like a great formula. But let's dig in a little bit. Here's another example of real-world correlation. Turns out that there's a very, very strong correlation between drowning deaths and people eating ice cream. Okay? So, of course, when I talk about whether one factor causes the other, I actually ask whether drowning causes you to eat ice cream, rather than the other way around. But the point is, of course, they don't cause each other. They both happen when it's hot outside. When it's hot, we eat more ice cream. When it's hot, we go swimming. And unfortunately, sometimes bad accidents happen when you're swimming. So the point is, just because I can show you a study that says there's a very strong correlation between sharing in social media of my content and the ranking of that content, doesn't mean that the sharing caused the ranking. In fact, just like ice cream and drowning deaths, a lot of sharing and high ranking happens to really good content. And it's not that one causes the other. So I'm going to walk through a little bit more background as to why. First of all, for a search engine to use something as a ranking signal, they have to be able to see it. There is actually no way for Google to know what content you've liked. It's impossible. That signal doesn't exist anywhere on the web. And then, now I'm going to get into a little tech geekery, so I'll give you the really high-level version of it, though. This is the source code for share in Facebook. And if you look at it, there's a thing in here called a rel equals no follow. And if you're not into SEO, that will mean absolutely nothing to you, other than it's an explicit instruction from Facebook to Google to say, this link isn't worth anything. Don't count it as a ranking signal. So this is something that Facebook has in their code when somebody shares a link to a piece of content. And so does Twitter. They do the same thing. And Google's own social media network, small though it may be, also. So the social media networks are actively telling the search engines, don't count these as a ranking factor. And obviously that has an impact. But let's just dig in a little bit as to why that might make sense. So here is a chart from a company called Chartbeat that actually shows all sorts of content. They looked at millions of articles, and on the x-axis here is how long people spent reading the content, and on the y-axis, how many social shares it got. So you see that here on my x-axis, these brighter colors mean a higher density of articles. There's a lot of stuff, right, down here, which has really not much read time and low social activity. And then there's a fair amount of stuff here that has high read time. And then up here, I've got some outliers, cat pictures, right, that have a lot of social shares. But what's the quadrant that's empty? The quadrant that has both high read time and high social shares. Now, for me, I would associate a lot more value with high read time for a piece of content, with apologies to Werner's cat pictures, than I would the volume of social shares. So this is just a signal that things that get lots of social shares aren't necessarily communicating a lot of value. And in fact, I have my very own cat picture for you. So here's one that got 25K likes and 2,700 shares. You know, so that maybe should rank high in Google for something, right? But it's probably not going to, you know, if you run a real estate business, it's probably not going to run high for Boston apartments for rent. Just saying, right? And so we have that problem, is that the content that gets lots of social shares doesn't necessarily relate to content that's good surface and search results. And also the fact that they can't actually see the signals very clearly. And so as we think about social media and how it influences SEO, what I'm getting to is that it really doesn't work so well. And one other thing I want to mention about that before I move on to how social media can help SEO, because there is a way, is if Google were to start using signals from Facebook, say, as a ranking factor, what if Facebook suddenly shut it off? Google's algorithm would be broken. And in fact, this actually happened to Google with Twitter about 4 years ago. And so after that point, they committed to just staying away from social signals entirely. But let's dig in a little bit to what you can do. First of all, there's the notion of building audiences, right? And I'm going to dive into some aspects of that, but if you share really great content, here I've got this idea that I've written a wonderful blog post, put that phone down, see? You can keep your phone up though, since I think you're videoing this or taking photographs, so that's allowed. And then it gets shared, say, by our expert, we're calling her Susie Powers here, on Twitter, right? Excuse me. It gets in front of Susie's audience, all right? So she has an audience, however many followers she has. And then somebody in Susie's audience, maybe Ralph here, reshares it, right? As soon as Ralph reshares it, I'm in front of Ralph's audience, right? This exposes a really important concept of social media that I like to refer to as other people's audiences, or OPA. How do I get in front of them, and how do I leverage that to build my own audience? Because when Ralph retweets this and I get in front of this other audience, some of these people may go read this post now, which would be awesome. Some of them may retweet it, and some of them may follow me. And this all helps me build my audience. Understanding these mechanics is really important. And this is where, to Werner's point, you have to understand what your customer or your target audience wants for content. Because this dynamic of resharing doesn't happen if you don't deliver the right content. And so larger audiences are really cool, right? Because they build your visibility in a great way. And I divide audiences into 3 segments often when I talk about this. Media people, influencers, and I'm calling it a larger secondary audience, but this might be your target customer base, right? And you should think about these three groups differently from each other. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why. But one of the great things, now I'm going to get back to SEO. I've kind of spent some time telling you social media doesn't really drive SEO, but the reality is, if I share some great content, right? I create some great content, and then I share it on social media. This could be a blog post. My blog post, right, if it's great content, and I share it in my social media feed, it should help me build my social media following. That's cool, okay? And then the fact that I share it in social media exposes it to new audiences that might send traffic to the post. It actually, if I get in front of a media person or a blogger, they might like the content, they might write about it and link to it. Links do drive SEO. So if the audience I've built includes media people and influencers, and that helps drive links, that's awesome. And now I'm talking really good SEO juice here. And the other thing, of course, is it might cause people to subscribe, sign up for email newsletters, request contact with you, many other things that can happen as a result of doing this. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about cultivating influencers. But first, why do we care? Well, influencers tend to have large audiences, right? So even if you've built your own audience and you have your own large audience, let's say you're an influencer yourself, if some other influencer starts to really like your content and share it on a regular basis, their audience probably doesn't overlap with yours exactly. So getting exposure to that audience and having them share it is great. And actually, one more thing I can say about influencers is there's a reason why we call them influencers, right? People listen to them. They actually want to see what they're sharing, what they think is valuable. So if I had, my wife, for example, share my content, love her dearly, but she's not an influencer in the world of SEO, probably not going to cause a lot of people to start writing about the content. But Chris Brogan, Warner mentioned him before, right? If he shares our content, Chris Brogan is a major influencer. That might actually cause people to go read it, write about it, reshare it, and do many other things. So, in the world of influencers, I've taken that red diagram that red rectangle that I showed you before, I've made it a little more complicated. Okay? So this is still the dynamic, the same blog post, and the same social share, and the same virtuous circle. But the influencers are an accelerant. So there's my influencer of the day. So when Susie shares this content, she accelerates this whole virtuous cycle. It goes faster. I get more, my follower growth goes up. My links to my content goes up. Subscribers to things on my site goes up. Everything goes up. So influencers are incredibly important. And actually this relates to what I said a moment ago. So imagine I got 7 or 8 people through 20,000 connections to share my content. I might get some shares and links, but one influencer with the same number of connections gets me more shares and links because they're influencers. And so when you think about building a relationship with an influencer, a lot of people make a big mistake, right? They just go out and say, hey, be my friend, start sharing my stuff, thank you. But it really doesn't work that way. You have to work at it. You have to add value to their lives for quite some time before they'll become passionate about you and sharing your stuff. So they, you gotta have personal interaction with them largely in the beginning about like just giving back, right? Like add value to their post, reshare the post, add comments. If they ask some question about something, see if you know the answer, try to be the first person to answer it. But there's one other subtlety too, right? Which is that you really want to also give value to others. It's really important. So, for example, if I were to do this, I'm sorry, I'm going to embarrass you here for a moment. If I were to do my entire presentation like this for the whole 30 minutes, right, it looks a little strange, doesn't it? Right? It's like, okay, I'm so focused on the one person, in this case, my example here, the influencer, instead of being part of the community in a broader sense. And influencers notice it if all you do is interact with them and try to build curry favor with them and really work on that, and you're not participating in the broader community. Influencers became influential because they learned how to share good stuff. So the best way to build a relationship with an influencer, yes, you do a lot of giving back to them directly and add value to them, but you got to have something that's worth their time to share. That when they share it, helps build their influence even more. And that's a really incredibly important point. So here's my ecosystem diagram for a third time. Same red rectangle I had before. I still have the influencer down here, Susie doing her thing. But now this whole virtuous circle, right, is actually, because of the links, is helping me drive my SEO, right? Hopefully I've structured my website in a way where I have internal links to my blog posts. My blog post ranks higher. And the visibility in search also helps drive new followers here. So now I have all these elements working together in a wonderful way, and it really relates to an integrated overall strategy. All right. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about some vertical strategies. Because one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is that they try to be active on every social media network. And I'm a big fan of choosing. If you have a small business and you have 3 hours a week to contribute to social media, I would argue put it all on one social network. Maybe create your profiles on the other one so people don't steal them and say bad things about you, but put all your effort in one social media network and go deep with it and make really great progress. And as part of that, if you're going to do that, say, which is the most important one? And if you're a little bit bigger, maybe you can work 2 or 3 social networks, which would be great. But you have to ask, where's your target audience going to be found, right? So, as Werner told us, your audience decides what the content is, but make sure that the audience that's deciding what content you're producing is an audience that will add some value to your business. There's so many different places you can go on social media. So if I were just sharing cat pictures all day long, I would have a large following. What would it do for my business? Zip. Right? So, how do you get to that right audience? So, there's many different networks. I just listed a few here. And they all have different orientation. They tend to have different demographics, different kinds of things. So you probably have to invest some time and figure out which ones are best for you to focus on. Now, our agency is about 65 people, and we work with some of the world's largest brands at Stone Temple Consulting. I've got a marketing department of 5 people, full-time, and we put a lot of energy into social media, and we're not active on all these social networks. We make choices about where we could best reach our audience. So one thing to consider is this idea of early stage land grabs. What do I mean by that? I mean, some new network comes out, or some new sub-feature of a network comes out. Maybe you could be the first in that network. It's a pretty easy way to potentially build a large following. So here's an example. A company called Best Made. They make a product called American Axe. It's an awesome axe, but it is an axe. And they went very deep in investing in Instagram. They do very little on other networks. It's actually not that small a business. And what they do is they share pictorial essays. Because, Axe is like an outdoorsman's kind of product. So they share all these outdoor experience essays, and they get great engagement. on Instagram. So they didn't spend millions of dollars on this, right? Focused on Instagram, they did their outdoor theme, they focused on the pictorial essays. So here's just an example, and this is just one picture, and you can flip through the whole experience, and it makes you feel like you were part of that day or that trip, which went into this essay, and it's very effective for them. So to give you an idea, this is actually a Google Trends chart showing the search volume on their brand name over time. That's a nice looking curve, right? Up and to the right. That's like if you have bosses in your business, they probably want you to go up and to the right, right? And 122,000 followers on Instagram, and it's actually a really well-known social media success story. All right, one last thing I want to do, and then I'll be done. I'm trying to get you closer to back on track time-wise here.
Sorry for that.
No, don't worry about it. So I'm going to talk about some principles of building audiences. So I said this earlier, you got to be a part of the community. Really, really important to do. Right? You have to be an engaged member of the overall community. And then, you got to give many times before you ask. Right? If you've just moved to a new neighborhood, right, and you're going to the neighborhood party for the first time, you don't walk through the front door and say, hey, give me $5, bro. That is the way you start the conversation, right? And too many people do that in social media. It's like, oh, I've got a business objective. I've got to get something going here for my business, so I'm just going to start asking for it. It doesn't work that way. You got to focus on adding value as well. And another thing is, don't get so focused on your great content. So Werner made the point that, it isn't your product sales pitch that you should be putting out there. You should be putting out value-added content to the audience. That's great. But if you think about what I said before about being a member of the community, what if 80% of the stuff you shared was resharing other people's stuff? What do you think would happen to your relationship with those other people? It would improve dramatically, of course. And then they will start thinking about and probably start sharing your content. So my assertion here is that if only 20% of my content is my own content, that it actually will multiply the impact of my campaign by 4 times, at least. Because I've been sharing other people's great content, I'm going to get some of those people probably resharing my great content. I'm getting in front of other people's audiences. They're amplifying my message in a wonderful way. This is a very important synergy in social media success. Share great content from others. And then, be an expert, right? I don't think you can escape that, right? Go back to my real estate example, Boston real estate example. If you're not an expert in that topic, why is anyone going to care? We talked about great content. We've both talked about great content now. But great content means that you help somebody with something somehow, right? And so here I'm showing my sort of faux expert here who has a highly engaged but very small audience. Oh wait, they're not looking at him. And then my real expert, my Susie Powers, who has a large audience. Because she's a real expert. She's adding value to that audience. Incredibly important. And then another thing you can do, by the way, this is just, I love this tip because, speak at conferences, and I always get asked, wait a minute, that's speak at conferences, that's not social media, what are you talking about? So, anybody follow me or Werner here this morning?
Nobody.
Right? No, yeah, no, I saw a few hands go up, right? Now, the rest of you are too shy, and that's usually the case, but because you all followed me, I know you did, I'm very confident. But it's getting out there. It's another way of showing that you're an expert, adding value, and doing good things for the community, right? And then, of course, engaging content. And yes, tag pictures work to a degree, but as I said before, you have to make sure that you're getting a ton of engagement with stuff that relates to your business. Very cool thing to do, by the way, once every 10 or so posts, maybe you show a picture of the office, and it has the office cat in it. Totally cool with that. But just make sure a lot of what you're doing relates in a direct way to your business, adding value to the audience, not a sales pitch, editorial content that helps your target audience. Because if you're building your following based on stuff that relates directly to your business, and your following is the right audience that can become customers for your business or help you amplify it. So that's really what you want to try to get to. You're going to pull the plug on me here. So you have to respond to comments. You ran late. This is your fault.
Yeah, I know. I've already in my 10 minutes. You got already.
There you go. Let's see. Okay. I'll wrap it up quick. Here's a great piece of content a company made. It's concert hotels. They did a study of the most which singers had the largest vocal range, and then actually analyzed all of their recordings ever, and they found out it was Axl Rose, by the way. Enormous amount of effort, shared over 100,000 times. And because it's about concerts, and it was concert hotels, it was a direct fit. All right. Just a couple of case studies, and then we'll be there. Here's a fantastic engagement example. I love this example. It's from Hilton Hotels. What they do or did is they were listening on social media for people who were asking things related to an area, like what's the best restaurant in Cambridge, say. And they started replying to and actually answering the questions, even if the person wasn't staying at their hotel. They didn't know. Sadly, the last tweet was on February 20th, 2016. They abandoned it. It was a wonderful idea. Truly wonderful idea for generating engagement. Unfortunately, because they were measuring the business results on the back end of it, they weren't seeing business results from it. So engagement does not actually correlate or necessarily drive directly business success. So be mindful of that. So here's an example of a company with a great social presence. It's called Copyblogger. They help people with websites. They have a strong Twitter presence, strong on Google Plus as well. And then you see their posts, and the social sharing numbers are probably pretty blurry, but 600, 800. They get tremendous social sharing everywhere, and that's their traffic story. Remember, we like up and to the right, right? And that's their organic SEO traffic. So they're doing great. So my summary here, social media, you do use social media to drive SEO, but it's not because of the shares themselves, it's because of the ecosystem. Understand your audience, develop strong influencer relationships, think about getting vertical, and build yourself a passionate audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Any questions, ideas, thoughts? Let us know. Yeah. No?
You talk a lot about
We have a microphone somewhere.
I can.
It's running.
You talk a lot about influencers, and I work for a nonprofit, and I know working with influencers can be quite expensive. So outside of engaging with the community, do you have any other strategies or tactics for engaging with influencers?
Yeah, well, engaging with the community, yes, but also how can you add value to them, right? So for you as a nonprofit, there are probably influencers who are passionate about whatever your nonprofit is associated with, right? So now it becomes a matter of targeting the right ones that have a natural affinity to you. And as a nonprofit, that's what I would try to do, is figure out what it is, who the people are that would be interested in engaging. Doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't going to want to charge you or whatever, but if they have a natural affinity, it won't be the big ticket fee, right? And it makes it a little bit easier. So that's an approach I would try. Yeah. Yeah, over here.
You said that high engagement doesn't necessarily bring about increased business. What does bring about increased business?
High engagement with the right target audience.
High engagement.
Okay, so so if you have a customer base, well, high engagement with the right target audience that demonstrates your expertise while being non-commercial. There, I made it more of a mouthful.
Say it again.
Because if you just, God, I have to remember it now. High engagement with the right audience that relates to your business and is non-commercial, right? So you're helping them solve a problem that relates to your market space and what you do, but it's not commercial, it's editorial. So people see that and they love that. Right there?
Yeah, do you have some recommendations on the social networks that you would concentrate on? I know that Twitter seems to be dying up a little bit with some audiences, and just your thoughts on that?
It really depends on where your target audience is, right? So, Snapchat is clearly a much younger audience, for example. So that's what you really have to get to. And obviously you don't want a network that's dying. Twitter's a long way from dead, by the way, albeit it has its challenges, there's no question. I'm not recommending you go buy Twitter stock right now, for example. Facebook stock might be another conversation. But you really have to do the homework of figuring out where your audience is most easily engaged. So I don't have a simple answer. It requires a little work. All right, anything else right there?
One in the back, one in the back.
Kind of a cold. Warner, you said you can't interact with a logo, but how can I, if I do it all for my business, but I work for a family business, I don't want it to be about me.
Yeah.
I want it to be about, so I don't know how to be personal without being too personal. I'm not sure.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that's totally fine because we skipped my question and answer. It was a kind of, like I said, it was open to make your own decisions. Does my microphone work?
Yeah.
So it is a little bit of personal decision. I cannot tell you directly. What I can tell you, right, totally on the right side, means totally uptight, is maybe not the best decision. To just talk about your portfolio, you're taking the most beautiful photos that you have and that's it. They're all professional, like you do a brochure. Social media is not a...
Yeah, it's working.
It's working? Yeah, okay. No, it's not. Okay, good. So sorry, too many things in the hand. Let me get that back. So that's my opinion. It's too wide on the right side is never a good idea. Now the big question is how much do you make it loser? Now let's say for a small business in the Boston area, they all have the kind of person who started that shop, who started this service. This is one typical approach that also big companies are doing, putting the CEO more in the center of things. For really big companies, it's one way. I think for small businesses, it's very much easier to be better relatable than for big companies. Big companies come in all kinds of conflict with that. And just putting the CEO in the center is not always, it's one way of doing it, but doesn't solve everything. While for a small business, who else is there? There's a family around that. How much can the public know who else belongs to your business? Does the public, is it allowed to know who else works at your place? Do you trust the people who work at your place that they do postings for you and will stay for a couple of years so that this kind of attention doesn't go away right away? These are conflicts that I cannot solve for yourself. It is not totally easy. But I guarantee you, the more personal you get, the easier it gets to connection. Thank you very much for your presentation, by the way, Eric, because you reflected on, it's of course not only hushing attention, but this kind of connection point is a very, very important thing, and you need to have the right audience too, so that'll learn from you. So I didn't want to stop that.
So think about it as being relatable.
Right, relatable.
It doesn't mean that you're sharing the intimate details of your personal life. So if you have a sense of humor about yourself, or humility, or you kind of poke fun at someone and they poke fun back, and you LOL, and that's a very simple way without going too deep down.
Going back to that point, it is a decision that you make. So the point is more, what I want to say is, even people like Chris Brogan, even Mary Smith, when you see private photos, I'm sure they know how far they go and how far they not go. And I think this is an important point. Because I know for a lot of businesses, like, oh yeah, I want to be more relatable, I want to be more private, I want to be more in this kind of way, and they haven't made a decision how far they want to go, and then it feels always like awkward. Yeah, this is good, this is not good. If you have once decided people can see parts of my home, you know every individual photo what you do. You know every photo when you post it. So know that, make this small filter, but that the decision needs to come first, and then all of this relationship is very much easier, because you made the decision up front and say, it's okay that I have kids, it's okay that I have employees, and I trust them, they're part of this kind of family. It opens a lot of possibilities up. But there's, when you go too far, of course, some dangers involved in that you risk maybe partly. Good.
One more question here.
Oh yeah, first, Harry, I give you the microphone.
Hi, I didn't see this referenced in any of the other sessions, and you seem very technical. So, you didn't touch upon it in your presentation, but I'm going to ask it. What do you see as net neutrality affecting social media strategies?
Oh boy, that's a big topic.
Can you repeat the question? Could you repeat
So,
that question?
net neutrality, how will it impact social media, or more broadly, the entire web? So, in a nutshell, what this is about is, can the people who provide access to the internet for you decide on what terms they let certain traffic go through their pipeline? So maybe Verizon or Comcast or Charter, maybe that's how you get your internet connection at home, okay? And what would happen if, for example, the Verizon, and I'm not picking on them, by the way, I'm just using them as an example. Let's say Verizon launched its own video sharing network and decided that they didn't want YouTube to go through at full speed, and they cut the bandwidth to YouTube videos by half. And then now the videos don't really view very well. And to watch a video in good order, you kind of have to go to the Verizon network. It's the only way you can do it, unless you pay Verizon more money to be able to get access to YouTube. So this is what net neutrality is basically about. The people who have the hardware, so to speak, the cabling to connect the internet, they of course would like to make more money, right? That's what's in it for them. But what happens is the democracy that the internet represents is in dire threat because of net neutrality. So that's what's at stake, and it affects everything. They could shut off access to Facebook unless you pay a fee.
So last question?
Hi, actually, it's a comment. So the way I'm understanding what you are telling us is that you want to find your personality. You want to find your company or your organization's personality. And so then how are you going to communicate that personality? And how does that then establish the relationship building that you're talking about? So I guess, that's how I'm framing it. Would you agree with that or disagree?
I think it's strongly related to that, and thank you very much for this question. It shows clearly that this is not a very common topic to talk about. All what I want to say is I experienced this problem for a lot of businesses, that they didn't make this decision how much they want to get the private elements, things that are not usually in a business brochure, that's the best definition to say, because they are mastered for a long time, and you have this typical business talk on it, how to make more relatable content. And there's a huge avenue that goes more in this relatable content, that goes more in semi-private areas, and you can be successful with that and bind up connections very well. But a lot of businesses are surprised about that fact. They know, others are doing it, but they don't think about that first, how far can I do this? Usually the guideline is, you know what, we should do it, just talk about the business, just talk about that. And then happens an awkward thing. They know they should not do advertisement, but they write only pieces that at the end invite you to get more information on the website about the product page or about the service. This is a very weak start.
Yes.
And I totally agree, not only kittens. Don't do only kittens, that is really right, it's not a good way. But the kitten from time to time can help you to be more relatable. This is a decision, because if you start today posting kittens and kids photos, it is not in a strategy embedded. It's not a good way of doing it. It's fascinating. Even the blog, the Instagram accounts that are look very, very private, I'm 100% sure these people make their personal decision how far they go and how far they not go. And a lot of businesses are not aware about that. This is a conscious decision. If you want to be successful as a business, especially as a small and mid-sized business, your best opportunity is to be relatable, offering people a little bit behind-the-scene view.
Right.
Well, I think it's true that most people don't want to necessarily relate just to a product. They want to relate to the company. So if they're buying a product, they want to feel like they've got, well, I'm somehow connected to that company. I would think that this would feed into it.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
So, yeah, at our company, our video series called Here's Why, it's all about digital marketing topics. This is not a commercial, actually. I'm not violating the principles of what we just talked about.
Yeah.
But if you go look at one of those, you'll see what we do in the beginning of the video is we poke fun at ourselves in sort of an introductory sequence that might last 30 seconds or so. And people actually go watch the videos to see what's the latest thing. Myself and the guy who does this with me, Mark Kraphagen, what's the latest thing that Eric and Mark are doing now? You know, what stupid thing are they doing today? But it makes us relatable. We're poking fun at ourselves. It makes it more interesting to do business with us because we're not some ivory tower somewhere, you know, looking down at everybody else like, boy, you need us. Oh yeah. You know, so that's a way to approach it.
Thank you very much. I think we need to stop here. We got in a great conversation that is good, and we have later the break. There's more possibilities. People will be around, I think, pretty late until lunch, and so then we have the breakout session later. So there's a lot of opportunity. Thank you very much, Eric, for doing the presentation.